Your feeling of helplessness is your best friend, savage.
Well, handsome, what are we waiting for? If you want to get to know a character, learn about their interests, goals, or desires, their butt is probably not going to give you that information.
You're somewhat right, but it can teach you a basic knowledge of the person, whether or not they keep fit and active. Because, you know, the healthier the butt, the more active their lifestyle is.
It won't tell you much about who they are or what they're thinking or feeling at any given time.
They wouldn't be thinking or feeling anything because they're not fucking real.
But video game designers often choose to put tremendous focus on the butts of certain characters, while going to almost absurd lengths to avoid calling attention to the butts of others.
You know what I'm going to get you next Christmas? A big wooden cross. So every time you feel unappreciated for all your sacrifices, you can climb on up and nail yourself to it.
These carefully crafted choices developers make about camera angles and clothing significantly impact how players think about and relate to these characters.
You know what I'm going to get you next Christmas? A big wooden cross. So every time you feel unappreciated for all your sacrifices, you can climb on up and nail yourself to it.
Third-person games with female protagonists typically display those characters in a way that gives players a full-body view.
Is that a legitimate complaint or a statement? Because if it is a complaint, it's a piss-poor one at that.
A classic example of this is the original Tomb Raider games, which are presented from a third-person perspective wherein protagonist Lara Croft's entire body is visible. In these early Tomb Raider games, Lara's butt is typically right in the center of the screen.
No, it isn't. Her head is at the center of the screen, not her butt. And even if her butt was at the center of the screen, so fucking what? Are you so afraid of men getting minor titillation from video games that you have to go and shoot, 6-minute bitch fest about it?
A camera orientation which, along with the sexualized clothing the designers choose to outfit her in,
it's not that sexualized. She's got her legs and her arms exposed. I'd like to point out Anita Sarkeesian has her arms exposed in this very video. So what? I can't vouch for her legs though, but I have seen Anita Sarkeesian wearing overtly sexual clothing, mostly dresses and that.
places a tremendous amount of emphasis on that part of her body. In dozens of third-person games with...
She says dozens of video games. I would like to point out the time of this recording I have played exactly 440 video games. That means I've actually played more for for the PS3 and the Vita than Anita Sarkeesian has talked about through her entire tropes versus women in video games. That's food for thought.
playable female characters, the character's butt is brought to the forefront, and that's where the player's focus is directed.
For myself, at least, my focus isn't on the character's butt. Usually I'm more concerned about getting the character where I want him or her to be in the safest way possible, so I can do shit like blowing shit up or driving expensive cars into oncoming traffic or beating people up or blowing shit up while driving an expensive car into oncoming traffic while beating somebody up.
In Batman Arkham City, for instance, the player's gaze is drawn to Catwoman's behind, which is emphasized by her costume and exaggerated hip sway.
You're complaining about a pre-established character who's known for slightly flaunting her sexuality, and you'd have to bring up with Bill Finger and Bob Kern, you know, the two people who created Catwoman.
The ceremony! The Sisterhood will never forgive me if I am late.
Golden Axe Beast Rider makes extremely sure that we notice the protagonist's butt just before we take control and start playing.
You know what? I actually did play Golden Axe Beast Rider for about 2 hours, and I got so bored with it, I actually turned it off, took it back to the shop and got something else, because it was that boring and shit.
And here in Tomb Raider Underworld, to say that Lara's butt is being emphasized would be putting it mildly.
Incredible. The carvings are clearly similar to early Germanic design, but this is far older than the 5th century.
and this happens all too
You
often.
can't miss it.
I played Remember Me, and I didn't think it was that overtly sexual with its themes. I mean, what? That's one thing she wears for the beginning part of the first level, and the rest of the time she's dressed not dissimilar from Jade from Beyond Good and Evil. I have been thinking about some time of Getting Wet. I've just heard very mediocre things from it. Bayonetta was designed by a woman. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, and I'm very sorry. I recently actually purchased X-Blades, and it is very mediocre. It's not even horrendously bad. It was borderline impossible to find, though. You'd think it was made out of gold, or platinum, or titanium, how fucking hard it was to find. Lollipop Chainsaw is fucking awesome. I recommend everybody go and purchase a copy of it, because it is funny as fuck. The gameplay is excellent, and the voice acting is fucking fantastic.
Let's contrast the way that women's butts are emphasized with the sometimes absurd lengths taken to cover up or hide men's butts.
Button to execute our super awesome amazing plan.
If some of this footage looks jerky, that's because in some games, trying to get a glimpse of male characters' butts can feel a bit like wrestling with the camera.
You shouldn't be using video games to look at man's asses. You have pornography for that sort of thing.
Common ways men's butts are hidden are by preventing the player from seeing below the character's waistline.
You fucking liar. I've actually played Prince of Persia, and you can look at the prince's ass. Yeah, that sounded really gay. Anyway, moving on.
Or employing a more over-the-shoulder camera angle, which has the added benefit of keeping the character's...
Isn't there a scene where Kane and Lynch are like naked and covered in blood? I wouldn't know. You couldn't pay me enough to play that piece of shit of a game.
But safely out of the frame. The most amusing solution is to simply include a cape, tunic, long coat, or very conveniently positioned piece of tattered fabric, which actively prevents the player from getting a clear or sustained look at the protagonist's butt.
You know what I'm going to get you next Christmas? A big wooden cross. So every time you feel unappreciated for all your sacrifices, you can climb on up and nail yourself to it.
For the purposes of this video, I tried to get a glimpse of Batman's rear end, but it's as if his cape is a high-tech piece of Wayne Industries equipment designed to cover up his butt at all costs.
Well, the fact that Batman has always been shown with a cape, but you could also download, was it Nightwing, and a few other costumes. I think there's Batman Beyond that actually gets rid of the cape and you can stare at his ass until your heart's content.
I like to jokingly refer to this aspect of a male character's costume as the strategic butt covering. Of course, not all games with male protagonists keep the character's butt obscured or out of frame like these games do. The real issue is one of emphasis and definition. A significant portion of third-person games with female protagonists call attention to those characters' butts in a way that's meant to be sexually appealing to the presumed straight male player.
Oh no! Straight males are getting minor sexual gratification from certain video games. Quick, call the fucking UN! Call the army! Call the navy! Call me when this fucking joke's over!
In this regard, the way that women's bodies are depicted is significantly different from the way that men's bodies are depicted.
You know what I'm going to get you next Christmas? A big wooden cross. So every time you feel unappreciated for all your sacrifices, you can climb on up and nail yourself to it.
There are a few examples of male protagonists who are wearing clothing that calls attention to their butts, but for the most part, men's butts, even when visible in the frame, are de-emphasized.
Button to execute our super awesome amazing plan.
Plenty of male heroes wear baggy pants or jeans, Uncharted's Nathan Drake among them, but nothing about his visual design or the jeans he's wearing encourages you to focus on his butt as some sort of defining aspect of his character. By contrast, this emphasis on the butts of female characters communicates to players that this is what's important. This is what you should be paying attention to.
Are you a fucking mind reader? Because this sounds more like projection to the ultimate degree. And furthermore, even if that was true, that you can't control what other people think, what other people can feel, or what other people can buy, make, or distribute. because at best you're coming across as an overly authoritarian cunt. You need to piss the fuck off.
It communicates that the character is a sexual object designed for players to look at and enjoy.
You know what I'm going to get you next Christmas? A big wooden cross. So every time you feel unappreciated for all your sacrifices, you can climb on up and nail yourself to it.
And by explicitly encouraging you to ogle and objectify the character, the game is implicitly discouraging you from identifying directly with her.
You know what? I can actually do both. Ogle and objectify them and sympathize with them. And furthermore, you're not an authoritarian. You cannot tell me what I can or can't buy, what I can or can't empathize with, or whatever I can or can't do with whatever video games that I choose to buy.
Strategic butt coverings and camera angles that obscure characters' rear ends are not an accident. They are a conscious decision made with great care, and the flip side of this is that designers often do the opposite when the protagonist is female. This difference in how male and female characters are framed often extends into the advertisements and box covers.
You're touching on Miss Explosion, man. You are getting awfully desperate.
Women's butts are front and center, and it's even become a depressing joke that their bodies are twisted and contorted in uncomfortable or unnatural ways so that their breasts and butt can be visible in the same shot.
You know, I've trained as an artist for a number of years, and even I can tell you that those aren't exactly the most unnatural poses. In fact, they look kind of natural. Like they're trying to move forward, but at the same time looking back, or some horse shit like that I can probably talk about. But now I'm just starting to rambling a bit. So anyway, moving on.
In contrast, when men are depicted from behind, there's great effort taken to cover up their rear end, often with other images or shadows.
That's because sexual dimorphism. We don't sexualize men in the same way that we sexualize women. With men, it tends to be the upper body, their arms and their shoulders and their torsos to help symbolize strength. With women, it tends to be their pelvis and titties to help symbolize fertility. And if you don't like it, I suggest you I don't know how you could deal with that situation. I don't know, maybe you become an omnipotent god and try to change the way that men and women sexually objectify each other. Or better yet, you could gouge out both your eyes. Or you could grow a thicker pair of skin. You could grow some thicker skin. Or I could stop doing this because I'm starting to ramble again.
Of course, female characters can also be framed in ways that aren't objectifying.
I'm actually shocked she's referencing Alice Madness Returns, considering I think one of the head production people at that game said that feminism or social justice was a cancer on video games.
An example of this is the episodic adventure game Life is Strange, in which the protagonist's butt isn't emphasized or centralized. The camera angles work in conjunction with the story to encourage us to identify with her as a human being.
I'm actually shocked she even mentioned Life is Strange, mainly because the character runs around in her underwear at numerous points in the game, and a lot of female characters also get killed during the game.
Sadly, the box art for the third-person action-adventure game Beyond Good and Evil emphasizes and sexualizes Jade's butt.
Kiss my ass.
The game itself, however, demonstrates that the Nathan Drake approach of outfitting a character in clothing that doesn't emphasize their butt, and not having the camera center it or focus on it, can work just as well to humanize female characters as it does for male characters. So to be clear, the solution here is not to simply show more butts of male characters.
Well, it's a good place to start, but for you it wouldn't be good enough because I've already established that I think you're a hypocrite and a small-minded idiot.
Equal opportunity butt display is definitely not the answer. Rather, the solution is to de-emphasize the rear ends of female characters so that players are encouraged not to ogle and objectify these women.
Ogle and objectify whatever video female characters I want to, because for me, sexual objectification is inherently neutral. Because for me, these are digital constructs. They have no independent will. They have no consent to give or take. Therefore, I can say and do whatever I want to whatever video game character that I want to. Because for me, also, video games are the ultimate fantasy. I can have a benevolent or malevolent game. I can become a dictator. I can build empires and destroy them just as easily as I want to.
But to identify and empathize with them as people.
They're not people, they're digital constructs, the outward appearance of gender. As for me, the perfect way of dealing with this situation is to build a mind of metal, so that something like this does not insult you or you take it as a personal attack.
This is not an impossible task, given that game designers do this all the time with their male characters. It's time they started consistently doing it with their female characters too.
All I have to say to Anita Sarkeesian is fuck you, and kiss my ass.